pretty much how it works wherever we've lived. Oh, you're the guy that married Jane. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing to be known for. Anyway, good morning.
Good morning.
I told a couple fellows this has been an unusually dramatic week at the university, in as much as I don't know how much you follow the news about there's a learning information system called Canvas that got hacked this week. And most of the university family across the country uses this darn thing. So I was grading papers this morning for kids who walked across the stage and got their diploma yesterday, hoping against hope that everybody did fine, and they did. Amen on that. That's a big relief. Big relief. Jane, since she was mentioned in the intro, is loathing the decision of having gotten her husband a bad dad joke calendar this year. One new bad dad joke every day. Tear it off. So I'm going to share with you today's, just as an opener, because that's the requisite opener for any kind of talk. Can you tell me what the favorite fruit of a scarecrow is? Well, of course, it's a strawberry. That's the kind of material we're talking about here. All right. So there's 4 questions we've been asking ourselves that we've rotated through the podium among our group. The first of which is, who's the man who has had the most influence on your life, and how? Now, for me, anyway, that was my dad. Now, it's kind of an interesting choice because I lost him when I was 16. Very young. He was 41 years old. He had had a congenital heart condition since childhood that kept him out of World War II. And he did all the right stuff to prevent what happened, but it still happened. Anyway, he had a massive heart attack at 41. I was 16 years old. And we were just at the edge of becoming friends. You know, I was not yet an adult, but at 16, you know, we had a lot of the same interests, and there were a lot of things that we joked around about. And he was kind of a pal. But he also was a great role model in a lot of respects, and something of a Renaissance man. I think I've tried to follow suit in many of those respects, but I'm more of a lowercase r than he was on the Renaissance piece. But I'm going to kind of give you a glimpse of who he was and why I admire his memory and try to follow in his footsteps in so many ways. First and foremost, he was an involved and loving father. You know, I can remember whether it was sports or school or just the neighborhood, Dad was a presence. And the other kids in the neighborhood knew who he was and knew they could rely on him for any variety of things. And that was a great role model to experience early in my life. He set high standards for effort. I can remember to this day bring home a grade card or time from swimming meet, whatever it was. The first question was this your best effort? And it wasn't being snide about it or trying to shame you into you could have done better. It's just if it was your best effort and you're confident in answering that question with a yes, good deal. Way to go. And I always thought that was a great metric as a father, as a teacher, mentor of any kind. If you're comfortable with being able to say, this was my best effort, great. And if not, why not? What can you do to do even better? You probably heard this growing up too, I'm going to guess, because many of us are in the same birth cohort. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Yeah, pretty simple. And then one that you might have heard less, but was a rule in our household, is after you had reported a chore of cleaning anything, the test for him was, can I put whatever I find in your eye? Well, let me go take another check on how well I did that chore. Dad was, in addition to the familial stuff, professionally, he was a world-class dental researcher. Jim Cecil was one of his students. And he was a student favorite in the classroom, but also widely published for some of the work that he did early in his career on nicotine and lithium and its effect on our central nervous system. I didn't get that gene. I still wound up a college professor, but not in the hard sciences. But I still remember that he kept a handwritten sign on the door of his lab at the UK Dental Center, and before that at Michigan, that simply said, he never locked the door of his research lab. The sign said, "Today's trespasser is tomorrow's experiment." Worked like a charm. One of the things Dad did behind the scenes that I've tried to also mirror in my professional career is that without any fanfare or need to be recognized for it, if he knew about a student who was financially strapped, he'd help them out. And I've worked in a career path, there were plenty of people that were financially strapped. Could I be the bank? Of course not. But could I spring for a pair of decent shoes for a nurse aide? Sure. But I wasn't looking for being known for that. It was just the right thing to do. And doing the right thing has kind of followed me professionally in that one of the niches that I have pursued with some vigor and great joy is in the world of healthcare ethics. That's the main course I teach at UK for both the MPH and MHA students is healthcare ethics. Because being ethically grounded in making decisions as an administrator is really key. You don't have to be a clinician. I mean, sure, you're going to follow good ethical principles if you're making clinical decisions, but a lot of times you're also, I'll use the pandemic as an example. We had a lot of instances during the height of the pandemic where we were having to make hard decisions as administrators around how you distribute scarce resources when there's greater demand than there is supply, like respirators and PPE and other kinds of devices that could be helpful. Who gets them and why? Those are really hard questions to be asking, but great material for the classroom now still. So I capitalize on that. Dad was an artist. You know, he was good with his hands. You would want that in a dental professor, wouldn't you? And so he dabbled a little bit with painting and with sculpting and other kinds of things, and pretty gifted with it. I didn't get that gene either. I know which art I want to buy. Can't create it. But he also was pretty inventive with how to apply things that would cross over. I can remember still to this day, our house was pretty much held together with dental material. I'm going to guess that's probably the case at Jim's house too. And it was pretty inventive how he went about it. Dad was a good campfire proficient musician, and that's how I characterized myself. I can play a little guitar, a little harmonica, lead a song if you're not going to go past the second verse. And that's usually enough, you know, for most social settings. Now, one of the reasons I wound up with the harmonica was I played the trumpet. And the trumpet is not really much of a social instrument beyond high school. So I picked up the harmonica, and it's kind of fun way as a nursing home administrator most of my career to just have it in your pocket and lighten the day, you know, with someone's favorite song or ask them, you know, what would you like to hear? And I just learned by ear. I was never trained to play that, but it was enough like playing a trumpet that it came pretty easily. So here recently, something happened that I didn't see coming. Kentucky women's volleyball team had made it to the championship game, and I was at the KS bar watching with a bunch of fans. I had my harmonica with me, and of course, when they did well, took it out and played the UK fight song, right? And it's such an autonomic response for UK fans. They start clapping in unison on beat, and then look around and what is making that sound? Well, I had no idea, but one of the kids at the bar caught that on video and posted it on all kinds of social media. And it went viral. And this college professor, me, playing the UK fight song at the bar. And so it went over pretty big, as a matter of fact, with the students. But now I've been asked to open the public health orientation in the fall with the UK fight song on. Not what I was looking for. Dad was a shade tree mechanic, and that's how I learned anything about cars, because that's how you got dad time. We had a big family. I was the oldest of 5, and being there to hand the tools and learn how the car worked was a great joy, but how you got time with dad. And so that's a passion that has followed me into adulthood. I, of course, can't work on anything that built much after 1976 because computerization of cars has gone wacky. Or you can do like I've done and get kind of a hybrid, not a hybrid like you think about fuel source, but a new car that's built like an old car is still made by Mini Cooper, and that's why I drive one. With a 6-speed manual transmission, thank you very much. One of the things that he did with each of us growing up, and my kids were just deathly afraid that I was going to do to them, was if you were going to drive it, you had to take it apart and put it back together first. So the year I was 15, because that driving age was 16 at the time, probably most of you the same, I got a little MG 1100, very similar to a Mini Cooper. Little front wheel drive, automatic transmission car that had been in the junkyard. I took it apart, put it back together, had a shoebox, not full, but some parts left over, and it ran. Never did figure out why, but it ran fine, got everybody to school, and I was going to Sayre, right up the street here, and so I painted the block blue and gold, of course, and I can still remember pulling into an Ashland gas station when those were still around, and the fellow who came out to check the oil when they still did that said, "Hey, mister, I don't know how to tell you this. Somebody put your engine in sideways." And I don't know what to tell you to fix it. Anyway, along with all that, kind of a standard in our household was, if you don't know how to do it, learn how to do it. And so a lot of DIY, do-it-yourself kinds of fix-its. Sometimes my wife has the confidence that that's going to go well. Most of the time she's got her doubts. You say, who are you going to call if it doesn't go well? Do you have the plan B already in place? So I've learned the hard way that plumbing and electric are probably out of my wheelhouse. Call somebody first. Don't try to do that. But most of the time it comes out at least okay for a while. And then the last thing I want to mention about him was an outdoorsman, but not in the way you might think about it with hunting. We were not a hunting family, so we didn't do a lot with guns, but we did a lot of outdoor stuff. Camping, hiking, fishing. But I didn't grow up around guns, so I appreciate those who know what they're doing. I'm not that person. Jane and I compromise on the outdoors. She's a farm girl. Doesn't understand why anybody would go to the country on purpose to spend the night outdoors. And in our family, if you couldn't carry it, you didn't need it. So I know Jim will appreciate that as a hiker. So we bought a little box pull-behind trailer camper, and that's our compromise. It's off the ground, and it's got a flushing toilet and a kitchen. But I think all in all from Dad, the big take-home was be ready to try any new adventure. Whatever that looks like. Don't be scared because you just haven't done it or you don't know anything about it. If it sounds interesting, go for it. And that has kind of been the rule of the day for me most of my career, both professionally and personally. And it's panned out pretty well. Kind of a footnote second. I told Josh he was my close second, but I kind of fibbed about that. It's my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, not my dad's dad, my mom's dad. Because I lost my dad at such an early age, he became a pretty key figure in our lives. And he was kind of a jokester, prankster. I imagine that I got some of that gene. Just spontaneous, not planned material like a stand-up comedian, but he had a quality that I have never mastered but continue to work on. He could pray at the drop of a hat in a group. Now one of my bosses at Christian Care learned that gave me the heebie-jeebies, And after he learned that, every time we had a meeting, and Keith's going to open us with prayer. Well, I grew up in the Lutheran church, and the pastor did the praying. We didn't do the praying. Anyway, it turned out to be a great growth thing. He was an S.S. Kresge manager. Remember S.S. Kresge stores? The K and Kmart. So that's where I learned to make a milkshake and do inventory. He didn't go to college, but he was just a natural leader. And a good many of the things I learned from him about leading people stuck with me as an administrator and later in what I teach in the classroom about good leadership. Probably the most notable of those is that if you treat people like they've got a brain, they use it. If you try to codify everything in a handbook and try to make sure that all the rules and regulations are followed consistently all the time in an effort for uniformity, you're going to just squelch innovation, squelch morals, morale, and he did a great job of that, and it works in real life. He had a pretty simple rule for how to succeed. When you move from community to community, you find your church and your lodge. And I read the other day that membership in lodge-type organizations is actually back on the rise. People are just looking to connect. No big surprise, especially after this episode with the pandemic where that kind of fell aside. So those are the two for me on question one. My answers to 2, 3, and 4 are not nearly as long, in case you're wondering about whether we're also having a men's lunch today. Just breakfast. So tell us about a particularly difficult period in your life, and how did your faith sustain you? Well, it should come as no surprise that the most challenging thing I could think of right off the top of the head was losing Dad. 5 kids, mom with no college degree. We weren't worried where our next meal was coming from, but it was pretty strained. And I was really, really angry with God. I thought, how in the world would you take a guy that has all this stuff I was just telling you about to offer the world, and there's fellas right up the road here at the penitentiary that did awful things, and they're going to get out? It just didn't add up for me. And for most of probably the next 4 or 5 years, I didn't darken the door of a church. I didn't really get any kind of organized religion connection, but did a lot of reading and still grew quite a bit in a faith journey way. Still confident that I didn't need all that church stuff for that to work. Okay? And then comes a guy that was a classmate of mine who invited me to, so it wasn't 4 or 5 years because it was my senior year in high school, to a church youth group at a Lutheran church. And we were living in Northern California at the time. Christ Love Incorporated was the name of the group. And they sang, contemporary Christian songs, contemporary for the day. I don't imagine they're considered contemporary anymore. And I got drawn into a group socially, and these kids were all really tuned in to Jesus Christ and what he meant in their lives and why that was important. And I heard it enough from people with whom I had developed relationships that I got kind of reinterested. But still a little hands-off until I came here to UK. And a similar kind of thing where I got invited by someone to visit Faith Lutheran Church and found out they needed a 2nd grade Sunday school teacher. Would you be interested in doing that? Well, heck, I don't know anything about kids. I mean, I got brothers and sisters, but I don't know anything about that. But there's nothing better than to get you back in the ring than to have to prepare for a bunch of 2nd graders on Zacchaeus. And tell the story convincingly in ways that are meaningful to them and entertaining. And anyway, long story short, that kind of pulled me back in just a little bit. So I'm glad I didn't meet Jane till my junior year. If I'd met her in freshman or sophomore year, I'm not sure that would have wound up with the same outcome. The third question is, as you look back over your life, what's the one thing for which you're profoundly grateful to God? And it's going to sound a little corny, and yes, tomorrow is Mother's Day, but it's the mother of my children, Jane. I count them my lucky stars, and I mentioned you probably have the same experience at some point in your life for someone in your life that God caused you to meet one another at a time when it really needed to happen, and then it wound up with a good outcome. And for us, that's been a 51-year ride. Now, next year will be the 50th married, but I mean, from the time we met, it was one of those storybook, I think she's the one kind of story. And so, of course, she was curious about what I was going to say to you guys this morning, and I told her the 3 answers that didn't include that one, and she said, well, isn't there a 4th question? Well, yeah, but, you know, I don't want to spill the beans necessarily. So I gave her a hint that it involved her. So if you see her tomorrow, you're likely to get asked, so what did he talk about? Now, give me some support here. You don't have to go into any detail, but saying, well, really, thanks God for you would be just fine. I don't think it's going to get me out of lawn care, but, you know, it is true. I'm so grateful to God that we met when we did and how it panned out. You know, she's my moral and spiritual compass. She's way better at, you know, everything from daily devotionals to, well, public prayer, like I mentioned just a minute ago. She's a marvelous mom and now a great grandma. She doesn't want to be called a grandma, so she's Nana. And I know a lot of women in our age that have found other Mimi and Nana and Mama and anything but grandma. They don't want to be the grandma we remember. She's also, don't ever get talked into a Scrabble game with Jane. She has got a vocabulary that's not to kill for. And so she serves as a great editor for me when I've done any professional writing. Hands it back to me. And she's always so kind about the fact that I know what you're trying to say here, but another way to say it might be some kind of similar to that. To me, this past week, she went on a girls' trip to Hilton Head to visit someone who's moved down there, and left me a note on the kitchen counter that she had left her car parked in the garage in such a fashion that the lawnmower should be readily accessible. Not too subtle. So the last question is, why do you believe in God? And my answer is pretty simple. You mentioned being interested in hanging out in the outdoors as much as possible. I marvel when I look at the stars at night, or at a river with the wildlife, or the plant life that surrounds us. I know Jim's a big plant guy. The mountains and the sky and everything around us, and the complexity and sheer awe of God's creation. I just don't, I can't even conceive that all that could happen without a point guard, right? And, you know, and maybe Mark Pope will find one soon. Who knows? So I'm gonna part with tradition that we've had thus far and try to give you a couple take-homes, not about Keith Knapp, but about some things I've learned on the path of leadership and senior living. That whether it's a spouse or a family member or neighbor or parent for whom you wind up unexpectedly in the position of having to look for a long-term care service, that you can kind of remember we had this conversation. If you don't remember everything I'm about to tell you, it's okay. You come back and ask me, all right? So I'm not limiting this to nursing home necessarily, but that's the one that sticks most families with the biggest anxiety is someone in your life falls, breaks a hip, and they're getting ready to be discharged from the hospital, and they hand you a list of nursing homes locally that can do rehab. Good luck, right? And I get those calls still. You know, hey, I know you're busy. But I know what you did for a living, and it's about my Aunt Dorothy. I don't know where to start. Okay, so here are a couple trade tips on how to go about that process. All right, for one thing, you want to try to visit places. Well, first of all, who in the group has taken care of your advance directives? You know what I mean by that? Who's got a living will? All right, great answer. What about a surrogate, healthcare surrogate. You know that terminology? Okay, that's somebody who can make decisions for you if you're incapacitated. And Kentucky is one of the few states that has that separate from what happens when you lose capacity or die, and how do you want to die. So they're companion, but they're different. And you don't really need an attorney to do it. Sorry, Josh. It's good to have an attorney to do it, but you can go online, just those keywords, healthcare surrogate Kentucky, and it'll guide you. Reducing that to writing. Make sure somebody knows in your family where that document is, because it doesn't do anybody any good if you've gone through the process and they don't know where to look for it. Okay. So when it gets time to looking for the service, there are a couple key, I won't say tricks of the trade, but things that you can look for that are simple to remember, and they tell you a lot more than you might think. When you're on a tour with somebody at the nursing home that you're considering, remember these 3 words: teeth, hair, and fingernails. Okay? And you can get all 3 in the same encounter. You're going to walk up to a resident in a wheelchair and offer your hand in friendship, okay? And I'm going to get close enough to you to see if your breath knocks me over with halitosis, what your hair looks like, and what your fingernails look like. That is predictive of overall care, all right? Because those are the last 3 things that get done. If those 3 things look pretty shipshape, chances are darn good that everything else is wonderful, because that's getting done. So if somebody run a brush through that lady's hair recently? Is her mouth in good shape? And are her fingernails looking like they're taken care of? And I don't mean they have to be wonderfully manicured, but they shouldn't have stuff stuck underneath the fingernails. Her cuticles should look good. I'm using her because 80% of the nursing home residents are women. Okay? So you can tell a lot with those 3 things. Make sense? Okay. The other thing is, if you can, try to orchestrate your visit at mealtime so that you can do one of 3 things, or all 3 of them. One, you want to look around and see how much is left on people's plate. Now that can be a little deceptive because the standards by which nursing homes have to serve portions are around a 34-year-old adult. And so they often get overserved in order to meet those regulations. So it may not be about the food itself, but it's a potential litmus test, okay? More likely, it's whether it's any good, whether it's getting consumed or not, okay? You're gonna look, if you can be there for the meal and get served a meal, experience it firsthand and have an idea of what people are eating every day, right? Everybody knows how to eat and has a pretty good idea of what tastes good, what's hot should be hot, what's cold should be cold, and it looks like anything, okay? The third thing is how the staff is interacting with the residents and with one another. You know, is it purely servanthood or is there engagement? And you can get all that with just mealtime. Does that make sense? Sure. Those 2 items, mealtime, teeth, hair, and fingernails, are the take-homes for you to remember if you wind up in this position, because it is a panicky kind of situation. And when I start with almost anybody who asks me about this, is you're in good company. This happens to families all the time, and they survive it. And let's walk through this together. So this is kind of my open invitation to you that if you're in that pickle, hunt me down. And thanks for having me this morning.